question.
Go ahead.
What do you think are the best ways to achieve constitutional change? Go.
In his first inaugural address, President Abraham Lincoln said, "This country, with its institutions, belongs to the people who inhabit it. Whenever they shall grow weary of the existing government, they can exercise their constitutional right of amending it." There are two ways to achieve constitutional change. There are formal changes, which include judicial review in the amendment process, and there are also informal changes, which include social influences such as media and partisanship. The Constitution can be altered to stay relevant to our era and morals within society.
Thomas Jefferson argued that the Constitution should be rewritten every generation rather than using the established system. Jefferson argued that as a new generation emerges, they have the right to choose for itself the form of government it believes most primitive of its own happiness. This may be true today as the Constitution could not address issues such as the Fourth Amendment and how it applies to privacy through the internet and other technologies. Locke believed revolution is a right of the people if they are dissatisfied with their government, so Jefferson's idea of rewriting the Constitution every generation mirrors Locke's views.
However, the idea of rewriting the Constitution each generation is flawed. Rewriting the Constitution creates opportunities for a tyrannical leader to be appointed and puts too much emphasis on current issues of the day rather than creating a lasting Constitution that protects rights. Specifically in a country encumbered with hyperpartisanship, it would be far too easy for the party in power to embed their own ideas into the new Constitution without regard for other views.
For example, desperation during the Great Depression could have allowed President Franklin Roosevelt's infamous court packing scheme to be tolerated, essentially giving him control of all three branches of government. With a packed Supreme Court, President Roosevelt would have been capable of passing any legislation he wished without interference from other branches of government, superseding the idea of rule of law.
Further, hyperpartisanship can also lead to gridlock, which impedes the process of writing a new constitution. Inability to compromise would lead to a stalemate that would slow the process of creating a new constitution. While Jefferson's idea may have worked during his time, in the modern day it would only lead to disagreement, destruction of old values, and government that only serves the needs of the people for a short term without regards for needs of the future.
The Constitution is a document capable of being reinterpreted and amended, allowing for flexibility in a changing world while still providing protection of people's life, liberty, and fundamental rights. Due to this, the process of amending the Constitution is a slow, measured process. Before an amendment is passed, 2/3 of the House and Senate must approve the bill, and then 3/4 of the states must also approve it.
The reason for this slow, measured process is to ensure that the moral intention of the amendment will fit into one of two categories, either describing government procedures or expanding people's rights. With the exception of the 18th Amendment, which was eventually repealed, the majority of the Constitution's amendments have reflected the creation of greater equality in rights.
The Bill of Rights protects the rights of the Founding Fathers believed to be crucial and essential. Through the addition of amendments, more rights have been recognized and more effective government procedures have been put in place. Incorporation is outlined in the 14th Amendment, which demonstrates the most fundamental preservation of rights. Incorporation allows for rights recognized under the federal government to be applied to citizens in the states. Before its ratification, states were not held accountable to abide by the Bill of Rights, but this amendment allowed the Supreme Court to apply the Bill of Rights to the states as cases were presented to them.
The 15th and 19th Amendments also demonstrate the idea of equality by giving voting rights to women and prohibiting the denial of suffrage based on race. Further, the 13th Amendment also promotes equality by outlawing slavery. Through the addition of constitutional amendments, the United States has become a more perfect union, based on the fact that people within the United States are ensured rights and protected from the violation of rights. By putting strict procedures on the government and the amendment process, the people of the United States have the ability to place checks and balances on the government.
The Constitution and its amendments demonstrate that since the beginning of our nation, the belief in natural rights has been protected and expanded. Having a lasting Constitution with established rights and procedures protects the rights of the people, while the ability to amend and reinterpret the Constitution allows for adjustments to society's changing morals and customs. Thank you.
426. What amendments, if any, are no longer necessary?
Well, every amendment within the Bill of Rights is necessary at some point because it protects either, or in other words, it expands on human rights or it limits the government and it limits the procedures of the government. So every amendment within the Constitution is necessary for having a limited government and protecting the rights of people.
I'd say you could argue that the Third Amendment is no longer applicable because quartering of troops is no longer really a prevalent issue today. However, if that did become an issue, we might regret getting rid of it. But one could argue that it just doesn't really happen.
It could also be argued that the Second Amendment no longer applies today because today we don't have militias in the traditional sense. We have the military and the National Guard, and so it can be argued for that people don't need arms because they're protected by the military.
Perhaps some clarification. Sorry. So, as you guys have stated in your testimony, we've been striving to make this a more perfect union. What's left? What else do we have to do to have a more perfect union?
I think one thing that needs to be changed is some sort of advancement of education. There's so many poor neighborhoods in which people aren't getting as good of an education, it limits them, so I think there needs to be some sort of reform in that sense.
Further, as we mentioned in our testimony, there's an issue of the hyperpartisanship creating gridlock, and this needs to be resolved in order to move forward and to go and create a more perfect union. If we have a congressional or legislative branch that doesn't agree, then ultimately there is no moving forward.
In addition, we could use more civic participation with the people in the United States, and that way they're involved more in their government and creating a more perfect union as they would with others.
Why do you think there hasn't been a constitutional amendment in the last 20 or so years? What's the problem? Everything's perfect? Why hasn't there been a constitutional amendment?
First off, it's very difficult to pass a constitutional amendment, and so it's much easier for the states to create laws to deal with issues that come up within their states rather than trying to get all the states to pass an amendment.
In addition, amendments are designed to be a long process because it doesn't lose the significance of the Constitution, and it talks about how it's supposed to be a very long, spread out time that it happens, and that's the reason why on issues like abortion or gay marriage, things aren't changed immediately, and it's not all just because citizens are very upset about something that it's a timely process.
I think that society today, we're in a time in which our customs and beliefs are changing fundamentally. You know, there used to be more of a majority of Christianity or more of a majority in the nation, but we have so much diversity now and so many changing values. For example, like she said, gay marriage or abortion, so many things that are changing that I think as time goes on, we'll see kind of what side becomes more dominant. So I think it's just the time period we live in.
Are you gonna? Okay. And further, another reason why we haven't had an amendment added is because we've just been going through constitutional common law and reinterpreting what the amendments already say. And so through this, everything and the protection of rights and the limits of government, as I mentioned before, is already being protected. It's just the way that we interpret it in which we make it apply to our modern society.
Go ahead.
Going off with biodiversity, biodiversity is not just like with gay marriage and stuff, it's also with the young people that are coming, like the college students. Our generation is more diverse in the sense of they're more open-minded to different ideas that weren't there before. So as time goes by, amendments might get harder to accomplish because people are going to have so many different ideas.
Which is superior, a written constitution or an unwritten constitution?
I'd say a written constitution. It establishes clear, distinct laws that no one can break. An unwritten constitution leaves room for tyranny because you can overstep it, but a written constitution is clear and concise. So I'd say that is definitely supreme.
One of the problems with having a written constitution, however, is the fact that it leaves room for interpretation and people can interpret things differently, and there can be problems that arise with that, where having an unwritten constitution, you don't generally have that problem.
In a way, an unwritten constitution can be like advantageous because there's a lot more room for change, and so it's easier to change the government based on the needs of the day.
Do you have time for one more?
Yeah, might as well.
I want you to give me historical examples where you think your judicial review got it wrong.
I believe it was the case of Plessy versus Ferguson that upheld segregation. I would say that was a definite clear time when judicial review interpreted the Constitution in a way that infringed on the rights of people.
Well, there's been multiple incidences in where we would view judicial review as immoral and wrong. However, within the times of that society, that's what they felt was right. And so those decisions is what they felt was morally correct at the time.
To counter that point, 85% of Americans have said that they disagree with the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United versus FEC.
Okay.
So, anyone wrong with that one? Go ahead.
I'll go with it. I was so close to saying it too. Citizens versus FEC, I think, or the government or the judges didn't rule that one constitutionally, I would say, because of the fact that they were trying to protect people's First Amendment rights and give them their freedom of speech and expression and through money donations, but it leaves too much corruption in the government in the election process, that it is not a fair ruling that they made.
Dred Scott morally right? Ooh, that's a tough one. I threw that one open. You guys all should have an example where the Supreme Court got it wrong. That's just an easy, everyone. Dred Scott, Gore v. Bush, whatever, you know, Gore v. Bush is my favorite. But, you guys all have to have examples of the Supreme Court. Google worst 10 Supreme Court cases and you'll see, you know, Citizens United at the top, but Dred Scott is #1 winner of all time.
If you really, really wanted to go like super controversial now, could you say that the Supreme Court ruling in the judicial review of passing this idea of universal health care was a bad decision because they're
Yes.
allowing Congress to overstep their boundaries in the
Yeah,
Commerce
you can
Clause?
say the idea of judicial review is wrong.
Yeah.
Why
That's-
should?
that's-
Say Marbury versus
They gave-
Madison,
they-
horse crap.
Yeah,
They gave
exactly.
themselves the
So
power
where-
of judicial review.
Yeah, where in the
Well,
Constitution does it say?
Judicial review, and that's what I wanted you guys to get to.
What was that Supreme Court? Was that even, like, that was a Supreme Court case, wasn't it?
Marbury Madison
No,
is
no,
the,
the one with the Commerce Clause with the universal health care coming up. Or
Or the
just
Affordable
they
Care Act
passed it.
Supreme
Yeah.
Court case. I don't
yeah,
know what it's called.
2012.
No, you have no one had.
How's that name?
Obamacare 2012.
Couldn't tell you the actual date.
I saw a couple other things. The president, and you talked about President Roosevelt, he doesn't pass legislation. Who passes legislation? That was in your testimony. Okay, so make sure your testimony's right, because I keyed in on that.
Wait,
We-
with the court packing?
But the president doesn't pass
Well,
legislation.
Wait, wasn't it with the court packing?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
would-
the
it
court
would-
guy was the incident, but
Would
he
it,
still
would it
wouldn't.
have given him the power to pass the legislation?
No.
No, who passes legislation?
It would give him the power to put more Supreme Court justices in the Supreme Court and overrule.
Congress passes legislation.
It would just allow him to control what they have passed through, like judicial review, like saying things are unconstitutional.
Yeah, I think you're off, I mean, with Roosevelt, he didn't worry about legislation, he worried about finding maybe some laws that he had unconstitutional, that's more what he was focused with.
All but two of President Roosevelt's New Deal programs were ruled unconstitutional. All but two. So he's throwing things out there, trying to get things done, and he's doing things in, you know, in the spirit of what he thinks is
Betterment of
right.
people.
And the Supreme Court's going, nope, unconstitutional, nope, unconstitutional. He's like, God dang it. So he proposes the court packing scheme to basically undermine the Supreme Court, and that backfired on him, but I think World War II happened.
When you guys are tap dancing around, who's got a great unwritten constitution?
Britain.
Say it! Britain has a great unwritten and they don't think it's messed up. Both you guys, it's good to have an unwritten constitution because it's ambivalent, but then it's bad to have an unwritten. Say you guys are kind of tap dancing around that. Say, Great Britain has an unwritten constitution. It's worked pretty well for them. Why has it worked well? But say it. Don't be afraid, because I know you guys know it was Britain. Is there any other examples of unwritten constitutions out there? Britain's the B answer. Find the A answer.
Find another country that has an unwritten constitution. No one
It's
else
either
has.
successful or unsuccessful.
Remember, that judge will ask the same question in every room he goes into, and everybody that is, you know, competitive is gonna say Britain. But if you can say
Right.
Britain and
I
Sri
don't even
Lanka.
know. Does anybody
Well,
know
I don't know,
another
I just
country?
made that up. Don't vote. Some other country. Then go. What did you say? Third Amendment should be thrown out because it's irrelevant.
Third. She said third.
I think you could back that up by saying that there have literally been 0 Supreme Court cases having to do with the Third Amendment.
Okay.
Just as like to bolster the answers. You're right.
And that's a fact. It's an easy fact, but it's a fact.
Okay.
You hit 'em.
The one thing that I saw that was bugging the hell out of me was, and it's good to know when you're answering, and it's a good like communication tool. But when Brett starts talking and then nobody hears exactly what he says and goes, it's really awkward because it's like, you know, for me as a judge, I see that and I see, oh, well then she only knows about, you know, civil discourse or.
So put more hand gestures in your toolbox other than
Yeah,
this.
just
this.
because you're moving it
Here.
so much,
Go here.
it's just
Go
yeah.
here.
And I know it's hard because it's hard to show like when and with 5 people it's difficult, but you know it's awkward.
We should have our hands out like this, and if we know the answer.
Then just put them together.
Yeah, so
It's like distracting when you're like this.
What about if you go like this,
If
you
you're
go like this, and
then
you go
you
like
know the
that?
answer,
It's
you
pretty
know
subtle.
the-
Yeah.
Whatever you guys.
Or if
as
someone
long as
takes
you
your
have a
answer,
system.
just
There's
like,
no right
instead of
answer
like
on
going
it.
like
You
this,
guys-
Yeah.
just like,
There's
As long as you all like.
break it up.
Yeah, there's nothing.
You took my answer, is break it up.
Yeah, I can't tell you what to do because I don't know, but it's just very
I
distracting.
think if you don't know the answer, instead of bringing it down, just like,
Yeah, I think like,
Don't
well, you
talk.
don't like do this.
yeah, but just like, you know.
Like,
Yeah,
like
just
this
don't
is
talk.
if you don't know, this is if you do.
Okay.
You could raise your hand.
We had a question in the back. Mr. Carlin, we had a question. Go ahead.
So, do they ask the same process?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, they'll ask probably 80% of the same, and
Okay.
then
Might
like
follow up.
and they'll follow up with a couple things here and there, just to kind of like really check your knowledge. But I would say that every single judge, there are probably about 4 judges, has one cross-ex question they will ask every single group.
Keep in mind,
Because they gotta be able to compare, right?
and keep in mind, you want to hit in this time frame. You want to hit, probably 6 to 8 questions.
Yeah.
So if they already have 4 prepared and you're getting them to think more, then that's obviously a good thing. So if they ask Spanish Springs 3, but they ask you, 7, that's obviously a good thing. And keep in mind, like what I did to you guys, I asked you something directly based out of your, and the judge will do that.
Yeah, and that's
And you
why
guys
I
are a group
asked
of 5,
because
And
there's
so you gotta be really cognizant of being succinct in your answer. We need all participation, everybody participates. But the answer's gotta be succinct so we can get through those questions with the judge.
What questions do you have of us?
I have a question. How did you word your question? Because we've had one, what amendment would you make? And that's where I
I've
was
already
bringing in
given
some-
that.
I've been
About the
seeing that-
judicial review?
Yeah, and then how you worded
Well, I
it.
was